Welcome to this video where I give my attempt to redeem Skyroad 2 of Sonic Lost World 3DS. This episode will be split into multiple parts where I tackle a different topic that I need to address in each video. This video will be about the following in the following order. First, setting your viewers up for watching the speedrun and blind run. Second, showcase of the blind run and speedrun. For further details, check out the description of this video. So before we get into the blind run and then the speedrun, I believe you should watch the following as evidence suggesting the importance of the speedrunning aspect in Sonic games.
そうですね。僕自身が速いものが好きだったっていうのもあるんですけれども、やはりゲームが上手くなったら早くクリアをしていくところができる方がいいんじゃないかっていうのが、その当時のゲームはですね、バックアップとかがなくてですね、セーブができないので、毎回ゲームを始めると一番最初から始めるんですね。今のゲームだと途中から始めることができるんですけど、昔は必ず一番最初から始まっていったので、じゃあそうすると一番最初のステージっていうのはもう何度もやってくるんです。そうすると上手くなってくると、このステージはもっともっと早くクリアできた方が嬉しいんじゃないかっていうのが発想の一番大きな元になって、そのためにソニックは速くなっていったんですね。なのでそれで速いスピードの中でクリアしていくっていう、そこがマリオとかと大きな違いになるんじゃないかと思って作り上げました。
Meanwhile, now that you've seen that, on to the blind run. And now, on to the speedrun. So here ends this video. I suggest the next video of mine you watch is the one where I give my explanations and advice pertaining to this stage. If you found this video informative and watchworthy, I'd really appreciate you liking and sharing this video. Welcome to this video where I will explain my runs and give advice to those of you who attempt to take on this stage. If you haven't watched the previous parts of this episode, then I strongly advise you to do so. What I'm about to say may be self-explanatory for some people. However, I want to make sure you guys play the game properly, instead of blaming the game for your own mistakes. What I want to say is that you want to bump into as many question marks as is possible. The info given informs you of what tools you can make use of in order to progress through the stage. I've seen people neglect question marks, seemingly because they felt the question mark would not provide them anything worthwhile, or because they didn't notice question marks while focused on the stage. The next couple of seconds, they are seemingly stuck in a section, without any good idea as to how they should solve the obstacle they are facing appropriately. One such example could be the first few minutes of Kobanamani456's 8th part of his Sonic Lost World 3DS playthrough. Now, I'm going to go through some advice and basic controls I followed throughout my speedrun. Here's a piece of advice I originally developed through a bit of trial and error. When using the double jump to reach a cloud while using the asteroid wisp, hold down the jump button. If you don't hold down the jump button, then you won't bounce off the cloud to any notable height. If you do hold the button down, however, you'll fly up all the way you normally would. This wasn't too difficult to piece together, but it should have been given along with the other instructions. In the end though, the mechanic isn't needed to complete the stage, so it's very dismissible. Another thing is to use the left trigger button to turn the camera towards the direction Sonic is facing. Yet another thing, the asteroid wisp is fully developed when a purple inner circle appears between Sonic and the debris around him. Now, I am going to state my reasons as to why I think this stage is comprised of good level design. The first few times going through the stage, you want to get to the goal without dying too often, and explore the stage to its fullest, so you take it slower the first time. This includes landing on platforms without having to, in order to avoid dying, or turning too many objects into debris for the asteroid, because you don't know how little debris is actually needed to proceed. As you keep replaying the stage, you'll get more accustomed to how Sonic works in said level. You come to learn what different paths, items, etc. are available at any given moment, as well as what comes next and what you already passed. You should find yourself progressing through the level with more fluidity and at greater speeds, traversing more difficult paths and making use of more well thought out maneuvers compared to your first playthrough, which should feel rewarding, as it is a testament to how you have developed and overcome all the challenges speedrunning gives rise to, combining usage of creativity, skills, and grit to accomplish the challenging and beautiful feat of speedrunning. Here ends this video. The next video of mine you watch, I think, should be the video where I give my response to Some Call Me Johnny's review of this game. If you found this video informative and watchworthy, I'd really appreciate you liking and sharing this video. Welcome! In this video, I give my counter-arguments to Some Call Me Johnny's points against this game present in his review. If you haven't watched the previous parts of this episode, then I strongly advise you to do so. He says, and I quote, "As soon as we head into Tropical Coast, the first issue with the level design slowly reveals its ugly self. The levels start getting too fucking long. And as soon as we head into Frozen Factory, the levels start getting really fucking long. Levels become tiring, you'll be getting hand cramps, you'll become easily agitated." End quote. A blind run of this stage should take about 5 minutes. A speed run of this stage could take 2 minutes or less. To put this into perspective, a good chunk of Sonic stages in Adventure 2 take between 1 and 2 minutes with quite a lot of skill. Unleashed's daytime stages take about 2 minutes each with a rather large amount of skill, so I don't see this stage as being too long. I quote, "And that is where the second issue with the level design will begin to take its course, the shit the game requires you to do in order to complete certain levels. Not just certain tasks, but also the repetition of it all. It forces you to stop all of the damn time to flick switches, clear a certain amount of enemies, or deal with awkward controls or certain power-ups, just when you want the level to end." Unquote. I can't remember any switches in this stage, nor do I view the asteroid power-up as having awkward controls, so all that remains is the killing of a certain number of enemies. The first section includes an arena-like section where you need to defeat about 3 blowfish enemies and then use the asteroid to turn not too many enemies into debris, so as to proceed to the next section. The section with the big enemies does not feel so much like a brawler or hack and slash as it does a platformer. This is because you can master and polish the order in which you kill the enemies, as well as how you go about defeating each of the enemies. Among other things to discover and master are the means by which you approach the blowfish, charge up the homing attack while best avoiding the rockets the blowfish fires, and the challenge of enduring the keeping up of the rhythm and skill needed to destroy all relevant enemies and proceeding further into the level. Throughout the rest of the stage, you are to use the asteroid wisp, which requires some debris in order to float. This is needed to proceed through the level. During Kubanomani456's second playthrough of this stage, he develops the wisp excessively. I say excessively because you do not need to develop the wisp completely. In fact, you're good to go with a single object having been turned into debris. The only exception is during the first part, where a fully developed asteroid wisp is required. However, that section contains a lot of enemies, so building it up doesn't require a lot of time and isn't very monotonous. The level itself is completely comprised of wisp usage. However, the asteroid wisp's controls don't feel awkward. The bottom layout is pretty much the same as Sonic's normal controls. The asteroid wisp's controls share the jump button, run button, analog stick, and the bounce button is used to descend faster when using the asteroid. 2 differences in controlling are that the asteroid floats and descends slower when in the air, and that there is no equivalent to the spin dash. What I've put forth so far would suggest this stage is fun, or is there a reason to disagree? He says, and I quote, "Focus lies on marathon levels, an insane amount of monotony, too many instances of trial and error." Unquote. If you mean that the level takes a long time to complete in combination with monotony when you say marathon levels, then I've already addressed that point. I don't see monotony in this stage, let alone an insane amount of it. Perhaps, if you try to fully build up the asteroid from scratch with just one responding enemy, then it can become monotonous. However, I've already covered how you aren't needed to be put through this. There is a significant number of times where trial and error is applied in this stage, but most of them do not require much of it. One such example could be the big balloon-like enemy in that round planetoid towards the end. Of course, your attention would be drawn to the only big enemy among many clones of smaller ones that keep respawning. Above it, there is a container of an asteroid wisp, so you would experiment with these two. When you're using the asteroid to jump across the gap where the big enemy is, the camera clearly shows the cloud above the big enemy. Since you were quite recently bouncing off clouds with the asteroid, you'd assume you should do the same here. There are a few other instances of trial and error in this stage, though they are about as easy to solve as this one. I quote, "This isn't even including the numerous do or die situations the second half of the game is played with. Tons of areas where using parkour over bottomless pits is mandatory. A shitload of areas where using wisp powers are mandatory in order to complete levels or die trying." Unquote. He is right regarding the large number of areas where wisps are required in order to progress, since this stage is pretty much completely based off of the asteroid wisp's moveset. However, you don't really die trying in this stage unless you don't follow instructions. This stage doesn't contain any parkour sections, thus leaving me unable to address this point concerning parkour in this video. Here ends this video. The next video of mine I think you should watch is the one where I give my response to Kobanomani456's pieces of criticism against this game. If you found this video informative and watchworthy, I'd really appreciate you liking and sharing this video. Welcome! In this short video, I'd like to address the complaints which Kobanomani456 brought up during his 8th part of his playthrough of this game. If you haven't watched the previous parts of this episode, then I strongly advise you to do so. During the beginning of his playthrough of this stage, he passes by the question mark for whatever reason. Therefore, he did not know that he was to enter the metal ring with the asteroid wisp. This caused him to cluelessly circle around in that section. Just as I mentioned in an earlier video, I really believe you should gather all the information available. The developers probably designed the obstacles based on the knowledge that players would have learned a certain amount of skills by the time they encounter a certain obstacle, and this learning to be done partly by hitting question marks. When he is on the top platform, around the middle of that playthrough, he complains about how the camera doesn't show him the way. Use the left trigger to make the camera face the direction Sonic is facing. So first turn Sonic, then press the left trigger to shift the camera angle to the direction Sonic is facing. Here ends this video. I believe the next of my videos you watch should be the video where I give my response to Nintendo Life's review. If you found this video informative and watchworthy, I'd really appreciate you liking and sharing this video. Welcome! In this video, I give my response to Nintendo Life's review. If you haven't watched the previous parts of this episode, then I strongly advise you to do so. I quote, "With arena-style 3D stages, there can be a heavy emphasis on puzzles or defeating certain numbers of enemies to unlock springs to the next destination." Unquote. In regards to defeating a certain number of enemies, I've previously pointed out that this is only the case in the beginning and how it could be seen to resemble a platformer rather than a fighting pit. So not as heavy emphasis on destroying enemies itself as a brawler or hack and slash would, as it focuses on platforming-like gameplay. As for heavy emphasis on puzzles, I can't think of any in this particular stage, but I do know of other stages that do, so I'll reach them and address them eventually. If you noticed such sections in this stage, you're free to correct me. I quote, "At times the level design falls over in a significant way. We've met a number of roadblocks that required a rest and approach with a fresh mind at a later hour, as some puzzles or enemy challenges can be taxing on any gamer's patience. We've encountered near impossible chasms, requiring ludicrous gymnastics if you mess up an initial series of homing attacks, a sequence of rolling snowballs while respawning enemies bully the blue blur, and a snowboarding level with controls that, bizarrely, feel as if they're operating on a digital, not analog set of inputs. While not representative of the whole experience, stages such as these, and others that feel like over-enthusiastic labyrinths with no end, have a damaging effect on the wider campaign." Unquote. What I assume is meant by chasms is pits. If I'm right in assuming so, then I don't see how this problem appears in this stage. This is because I can't think of any section where failing a sequence of homing attacks leads one into a pit. The only section of this stage that I can think of that requires homing attacks is the first one, but there are no pits there, and the rest of the stage is comprised of, well, wisp usage. Wisp usage that does not include homing attacks. The other problems are seemingly oftentimes the result if you don't hit the question marks, as is the case in Kobanomani's playthrough. A Another way this could be the case is if one doesn't understand the way the asteroid wisp works. They had plenty of opportunities to get accustomed to the asteroid wisp prior to this stage, such as at the first stage of the second world, where the same wisp is used throughout the majority of that stage. Also, as previously brought up, Kobe unnecessarily puts himself through monotony by maxing out the asteroid when he only needs one object turned to debris. Doing it this way can definitely be taxing, but can easily be evaded. I'm speaking of the sections after the first sections of the stage. I quote, "One similarity with its Wii U brethren, however, is that we question whether younger gamers will be able to handle the maneuvers and skills required, especially in the aforementioned stages that are poorly designed." Unquote. Not poorly designed. Question marks. If not, they learn the value of question marks through trial and error. Or maybe they come to like this sort of exploration-based trial and error. I quote, "Overall, the campaign veers from decent moments to drawn-out stages that exasperate rather than satisfy. Completionists can seek out red coins and target better grades in each level, but we suspect most will just be happy to see the end of some more confusing and agitating levels. Therein lies the great flaw with this effort from Dims. Too much of the game's gameplay isn't fun." Unquote. By now, I've already presented my arguments as to why this stage does satisfy and is fun. This stage isn't particularly confusing or agitating, if at all. Also, I'm happier when I am rewarded with the stage's replay value rather than finishing the stage once and leaving it be forever. I quote, "These extra modes are all welcome, and selecting favorite stages in any of these options is as pleasurable as expected. Unfortunately, this is a title riddled with poorly designed stages, or in some cases areas of stages. These issues vary in form, whether with sudden deaths, cruel one-shot combos, or unforgivably tedious stages that barely resemble a Sonic game at all, but instead rely upon unimaginative subtasks in open areas before progress is allowed. Throw in fiddly controls that, though workable for experienced gamers, intimidate younger or less experienced gamers, and this is a Sonic adventure that comes across as a hodgepodge of ideas, some of which shouldn't have made it past the concept stage." Unquote. This stage is clearly not poorly designed. Can't think of any sudden deaths or cool one-shot combos that may be present in this stage, so anyone is welcome to point out any such thing. This stage is clearly not tedious if you play it correctly. I do not know of any subtask-like open areas in this stage, as even the arena places with enemies can be handled with platforming as maneuvers rather than filler-like crawling. The order in which the enemies should be taken out, the way to approach them, evade their attacks, and take them out in the least amount of time as possible make them fitting of being in a Sonic game. I don't know about fiddly controls, but as I can master these stages and have tried to speedrun Sonic titles from the Genesis, Adventure, and Boost era, I think the controls are at least decent. With the 3 different speeds and general slowing down of the 2 lower speeds in comparison to the previous Sonic games, I think it likely that the controls should be workable for any age group of gamers. However, not being a child keeps me from actually giving a definite answer to the matter of younger gamers' actual experience, so feel free to point out your thoughts regarding this matter. The hodgepodge thing I may come back to if I'll make a full game review, but this stage itself has a good focus on platforming as the asteroid. I quote, "Sonic Lost World on the 3DS has glimpses of excellence, but these flashes are overwhelmed by the numerous mediocre stages and a few that are poorly designed and, as a result, too taxing to encourage enjoyment. In trying to incorporate 3D environments and ideas from the Wii U title, Dims has rather tied Sonic's red boots together, causing him to often stumble and fall. Dedicated franchise fans may be able to make a reasonable attempt at gleaning some satisfaction from this one, but for most it will be a distinctly average experience." Unquote. I consider this stage to be good, not mediocre, and definitely not poorly designed, therefore not too taxing to encourage enjoyment. I don't see how this stage can be anything but far better than average for the vast majority of players, given they don't play with overconfidence nor with presumptions of this Sonic game. And here ends this video. I recommend the next video of mine you watch be the one where I try to counter the arguments of VideoGamer.com's review. If you found this video informative and watchworthy, I'd really appreciate you liking and sharing this video. Welcome! In this video, I'll give my response to VideoGamer.com's review of this game. If you haven't watched the previous parts of this episode, then I strongly advise you to do so. I quote, "There are less annoying instant death moments, only less, mind. They're still about," unquote. I found none. Please point out any such instances if you've found any. I quote, "Sonic, while generally controlling with more grace, will again sometimes ignore what you actually want him to do due to another dodgy homing system, leaving you to blurt out profanities like an old sailor," unquote. As you spend 90% of the stage in the asteroid form, which doesn't have a homing attack, the homing attack could only become a problem during the first section of the stage where you need to take out the blowfish enemies with the homing. Even then, I rarely find the system being the problem. Only instances I can come up with are when the enemies move in a way that gets in the way of a charge homing attack and makes homing do 1 unit of damage instead of full damage. I quote, "As in the Wii U offering, levels drag on endlessly, and a few of them aren't fun to go through in the slightest," unquote. About 5 minutes for a blind run and about 2 minutes for a speedrun. How can that even be seen as endless? This one is certainly good fun. Just look at the fair challenge it provides, and the reward once you've mastered the stage and speedrun it. I quote, "It's also blighted by an overuse of gimmicks such as moments that see Sonic on a snowboard. It'll have you grinding your teeth, it's that abysmal, and just feels cheap when it shunts you off a ledge or forces you to miss a platform," unquote. I agree that there is an extensive amount of the game bound by gimmicks, but I don't think they damage the experience. For example, the Asteroid Wisp is likely the main gimmick of this stage, and it is reminiscent of Sonic's normal gameplay but with some twists that simply add variation, thus positively adding to the overall experience of the game. I may address the thing about Sonic on a snowboard in due time. I assume you specifically mean the snowboard gimmick when speaking of it forcing you to miss a platform, as the snowboard sections don't allow backtracking, whereas the asteroid does, so I can't really address the last few sentences of criticism when it comes to this stage. Here ends this video. I suggest the next video of mine you watch be the short concluding one. If you found this video informative and watchworthy, I'd really appreciate you liking and sharing this video. Welcome to the concluding video of this episode. If you haven't watched the previous parts of this episode, then I strongly advise you to do so. I'll begin by addressing why I haven't made a separate video where I give my response to IGN's review. Then I will conclude this episode. I just couldn't find a sufficient amount of criticism applicable to this stage in IGN's review. The piece of criticism which did should have already been addressed by now. And here ends the last part of this 7-part series of trying to redeem Skyroad 2 of Sonic Lost World 3DS. I hope you learned a number of things from these videos, and I hope you look forward to my next episode where I'll be redeeming Skyroad 1. If you found this series informative and worthy of watching, I'd really appreciate you liking and sharing this video. Also, if you want to be notified of when I release my next video, would it perhaps not be best if you subscribe to my channel? Stay critical and stay humble. See you next time.